My name doesn't matter. Maybe it never did. All that matters is the story I carry inside me. The weight I've dragged through years of labor, heartbreak, and disappointment. If you strip away the noise, the excuses, the maybes, and what-ifs, what you're left with is this. I gave everything from my son, and he gave me nothing but contempt. But it wasn't always that way. No, there was a time when I thought love would be enough. I still remember the day Daniel was born. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and fear. My wife's screams echoed in the sterile room, but then, suddenly, they were replaced by another cry, higher, sharper. A baby's cry, his cry. They placed him in my arms, this squirming, red-faced creature with tiny fists clenched like he was ready to fight the world already. I looked down at him, felt the weight of his little body, and swore a vow. I'll never let you down, son, never. I didn't have much, just a tired body, a steady job at the plant, and the stubborn belief that hard work could hold a family together. But in that moment, with his mother smiling weakly from the hospital bed, I thought I was the richest man alive. We named him Daniel, and Daniel was my world. Those early years were golden. Even though we were dirt poor, I worked 12-hour shifts at the steel plant, came home covered in soot and sweat, and still found the strength to crawl on the floor, building towers of blocks just so he could knock them down and laugh. His mother would hum while cooking dinner, filling the small kitchen with warmth. She had this way of turning scarcity into abundance, stretching a pound of ground beef into meals for a week, sewing patches into my work pants so I could wear them another year, whispering encouragement in my ear when exhaustion made me doubt myself. We didn't have much, but we had love, and for a while it felt like enough. But life doesn't play fair. When Daniel was 9, his mother started coughing. At first it was little things, a tickle in her throat, fatigue she brushed off. Then came the hospital visits, the tests, the whispering doctors. Aggressive, they said. Limited options. Cancer.
It hit fast, like a fire consuming dry timber. 1 month she was laughing in the kitchen, flour on her cheeks, hair tied back with a ribbon. 6 months later, she was in a bed, her skin pale, her eyes sunken, her voice a ghost of itself. I held her hand every night, praying to a God I wasn't sure I believed in, begging for mercy, for a miracle, for anything. But mercy never came. She was gone before her 40th birthday. I buried her on a gray afternoon while rain pelted down. Daniel stood beside me in a little black suit, jaw set too tight for a child, eyes dry. He didn't cry, not then, not ever. He just stared at the coffin as if daring the world to hurt him again. I should have held him tighter, should have said more, but I was drowning myself. And from that day on, it was just me and him. I became father and mother both, packed his lunches, tried and failed to cook decent dinners, learned how to scrub stains out of jeans. I worked double shifts because the bills didn't care that my heart was broken. I came home bone-tired, my back screaming, my lungs full of steel dust. But when he ran to the door shouting, "Dad!" and threw his little arms around my waist, all the pain vanished. We'd sit at the table, just the two of us, eating beans and rice or reheated stew, and he'd tell me about dinosaurs, superheroes, or what his teacher said. I listened to every word, memorized every smile. Those were the moments that kept me alive. I thought, if I just keep pushing, if I just keep giving, he'll grow up knowing love. He'll remember the sacrifices. He'll be proud of me one day. That belief carried me through sleepless nights, through 30-hour shifts, through winters where the cold seeped into my bones. But love doesn't always grow. Sometimes it rots. And I didn't see it happening until it was too late. The first cracks appeared when he turned 13. He stopped waiting at the door, stopped looking me in the eye. His words shrank to grunts and sighs. One rainy morning, I offered him a ride to school. He looked at my old Ford pickup, rust eating the fenders, engine coughing like an old smoker, and he shook his head. "No thanks, a walk." "Son, it's pouring, you'll catch cold." He glanced at the truck with disgust. "It's embarrassing, Dad. Everyone laughs when they see it." Embarrassing. That truck had carried groceries home when we had barely enough to fill a bag. It had taken him fishing, where his mother used to laugh and splash us both. It had carried me to work every morning so he could eat every night. But to him, it was nothing but shame.
I drove him anyway. He bolted out the moment we arrived, hood pulled over his head, not even glancing back. By 15, the demands started. Sneakers that cost more than my week's pay, the latest phone, designer clothes. "Everyone else has them," he'd say. "Why can't you ever get me what I need?" I worked more shifts. I sold my guitar, the only thing I'd kept from my youth, just to buy him a jacket he swore would make him fit in. He wore it once, then tossed it on the floor. When I asked why, he rolled his eyes. "Nobody wears that brand anymore. God, you're so clueless." I picked it up off the floor after he left, sat on the edge of my bed, holding it, wondering if he had any idea what it had cost me. The insult sharpened around then. "You're pathetic. Why couldn't I get a real dad? You're useless." Each word landed like a blade. I wanted to fight back, but when I looked into his eyes, I still saw the little boy who used to wait for me at the door. So I swallowed the pain, told myself it was just a phase. Teenagers lash out. He'd grow out of it. But he didn't. By the time Daniel turned 17, the gulf between us felt like an ocean. I still woke up before dawn, made coffee as bitter as it could strip paint, packed my lunch in an old tin and headed to the plant. 12, sometimes 14 hours later, I dragged myself home, shoulders aching, boots heavy with steel dust. And more often than not, Daniel wasn't there. He'd be out with friends, or locked in his room, headphones blasting music that rattled the walls. When I knocked to tell him dinner was ready, I'd hear a muffled, "I'm not hungry." So I ate alone. The house that once echoed with laughter and conversation had turned into a tomb, filled only with the hum of the fridge and the creak of old pipes. I tried to connect with him. God, I tried.
One Saturday, I scraped together enough money to take him out for burgers. I thought maybe, just maybe, we could sit like we used to, talk about life, laugh over greasy fries. But he barely looked up from his phone. Between bites, he scrolled through pictures of kids with shiny cars, designer jackets, smiling girlfriends. Every so often, he'd snort or chuckle, shaking his head. "What's funny?" I asked. "Nothing," he muttered. Then, after a pause, he added under his breath, "You wouldn't get it." I tried again. "You know, your mom used to love this place. She said their milkshakes—" "God, Dad, can you stop bringing her up all the time? She's dead. Get over it." The words hit me harder than any steel beam ever could. I just sat there, the milkshake straw between my fingers, trembling. He never looked up. Senior year came, and with it talk of colleges. I'd saved every penny I could over the years, cut back on meals, skipped replacing my boots until they had holes in the soles, took on weekend shifts, worked holidays even when my body screamed for rest. All so I could hand him a chance at a future better than mine. When I showed him the savings account, told him it was for his tuition, I expected at least a flicker of gratitude. Instead, he frowned. "This isn't enough for the schools I want. You should have worked harder." Worked harder. I stared at him, words caught in my throat. My hands, scarred, calloused, cracked from years of labor, trembled on the table. All the nights I'd staggered home half dead. All the times I'd coughed blood into the sink from the dust in my lungs. All the birthdays I'd missed so I could afford his clothes, his gadgets, his endless demands. And he thought I hadn't worked hard enough. That night, I sat alone on the porch, staring at the stars. I whispered to the darkness, "What more could I have given?" No answer came. Graduation was worse. I took the day off, unpaid, just to be there. Wore my only suit, the one that smelled faintly of mothballs, but still held its shape. Sat in the bleachers, heart swelling as I watched my son stride across the stage in cap and gown. When his name was called, I clapped until my palms burned, shouted his name with all the pride a man could muster. He didn't look at me. After the ceremony, families gathered for photos. Mothers hugged sons. Fathers posed proudly beside daughters. I searched for Daniel in the crowd, spotted him laughing with friends near the parking lot. I hurried over, camera in hand. "Son, let's get a picture together." He stiffened. His friends looked at me, at my worn suit, my grease-stained hands, my thinning hair, and smirked. "Maybe later," he muttered. But later never came. I drove home that night with the camera still in my lap, unused. Then came college. Daniel wanted out of the town, out of the house, out of my shadow. He applied to universities miles away, packed his bags without looking back. I helped load the car, every box a reminder that the little boy I once knew was long gone. When the last bag was in, I reached out, pulled him into a hug. For a brief moment, I thought I felt him hug back. But then he pulled away, muttering, "Don't make this weird." And just like that, he was gone. The house grew quiet after that, too quiet. I'd come home from work, and the silence would press against me like a weight. No laughter, No arguments, no clatter of dishes or footsteps running down the hall. Just me and the ghosts. I kept his room the same, hoping maybe he'd come back for a weekend. But weeks turned into months, and months into years. When he did call, it was never to ask how I was doing. It was always, "Dad, I need money. For books, for rent, for a new laptop." I sent what I could. Skipped paying the heating bill some months just to make sure he had what he asked for. Sat shivering under blankets while he texted me about new sneakers or the trip his friends were planning. And each time I told myself, this is what fathers do. They give until there's nothing left.
But no matter how much I gave, it was never enough. The calls grew sharper. "You're so damn stingy. Why didn't you plan better? God, no wonder Mom died young, being stuck with you." That last one nearly broke me. I sat with the phone pressed to my ear, his words buzzing like hornets. My vision blurred. My hand shook. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him the truth, that his mother had loved me, that she had died wrapped in my arms, whispering my name, that I had sacrificed everything for him. But all I said was, "I'll send what I can, son." And I did. Always. The years rolled on, and I grew older. My back bent, my hands grew stiff, my lungs weaker. Retirement loomed, not as a reward, but as a sentence. What would I do when the plant finally let me go, when the checks stopped coming? I told myself Daniel would be there, that after all I gave, he'd take care of me, that sons repay their fathers eventually. It was the only thing that kept me going. But deep down in the hollow of my chest, a darker truth stirred. I began to realize I had built my entire life around a son who despised me. And that truth was the seed of something dangerous. The first time I saw Daniel again after college was 2 years later. I had taken a rare Saturday off work, spent the morning scrubbing the kitchen and mowing the lawn. I wanted the place to look welcoming, like the home he'd remember. I even cooked his favorite, beef stew, the way his mother used to make it, with carrots and potatoes simmered until they melted on the tongue. I sat at the table, stew steaming in the pot, waiting. Hours passed. When his car finally pulled up, I rushed to the window. He stepped out, taller, broader, dressed in a crisp shirt I knew I could never afford. He carried himself differently now, like the world owed him respect. I opened the door, smiling, despite the ache in my chest. "Daniel, welcome home, son." He gave me a nod, just a nod, no hug, no warmth. His eyes swept over the porch, the chipped paint, the sagging gutter, and I saw something like disdain flicker across his face. Inside, he sat at the table but didn't touch the stew. Instead, he scrolled through his phone, thumb moving quick. "Long drive?" I asked, desperate for conversation. "Yeah, gas prices are insane. You should have sent me some money for the trip." I forced a chuckle. "I didn't know you were coming until last night." "Yeah, well, you should have guessed." The word stung, but I swallowed it down. I tried to ask about his life, his job, his friends, if he was seeing anyone. He answered with one-word replies, eyes never leaving the screen. Finally,
I asked the question that had burned inside me for years. Do you ever think about your mother? For the first time all evening, he looked at me. His eyes were cold. Why, so you can cry about her again? You're pathetic, Dad. You've been living in the past your whole life. I sat frozen. The stew between us cooled, untouched. That night, when he left, he didn't even say goodbye. Just grabbed his keys, muttered something about being busy, and walked out. I sat at the table until the sun came up, staring at 2 bowls of cold stew. After that, the visits grew fewer, the calls grew shorter, the requests for money grew larger. I sold the truck, the same one he once called embarrassing, just to cover one of his debts. When I told him what I'd done, he didn't even thank me, just said, "Took you long enough." Years slipped by. My body slowed, but my heart never stopped hoping. Hoping he'd change. Hoping one day he'd look at me with the same love I'd carried for him since the moment I first held him in my arms. But instead, his words grew sharper, his demands heavier. He started blaming me for everything wrong in his life. If he didn't get the job he wanted, it was because I hadn't raised him right. If he struggled with money, it was because I hadn't left him enough. If his relationships failed, it was because I had set a bad example. Every failure, every disappointment, somehow circled back to me. And I took it. God help me, I took it all. Because he was my son. Because I couldn't imagine a world where I stopped trying. But something inside me was changing. The hurt was hardening into something else. Something darker.
One night, after another call that ended with him cursing me out, I sat alone in the living room. The house was silent, but my mind was loud. Every insult, every demand, every moment of disrespect replayed in my head over and over like a record stuck on the worst part of the song. I looked at my hands. These hands that had built his life, that had sacrificed, bled, and broken so he could have a chance at more. And for the first time, I asked myself, what if love isn't enough? What if the only language he understood was pain? I hated myself for even thinking it. Hated the way the thought pulsed in my chest, hot and heavy, like a second heartbeat. But once the seed was planted, it began to grow. Retirement came soon after. The plant gave me a cake, a cheap watch, and a pat on the back for 35 years of breaking my body. My coworkers clapped, some hugged me, but when I walked out of the gates that last day, I felt hollow. I had given everything to that place, and now it was done with me. All I had left was Daniel. I called him that night, voice thick with emotion. Told him I wanted to celebrate, just the 2 of us, maybe go fishing like old times. He laughed, a short, cruel sound. Celebrate what? You're retired. You're basically useless now. You should have saved more, Dad. Don't expect me to carry you. The line went dead. And just like that, I knew the truth I'd been avoiding for years. He wasn't going to be there for me. Not now, not ever. The son I'd raised, the son I'd loved more than life itself, was gone. All that remained was a man who saw me as a burden, a man who had taken everything and given nothing. And for the first time,
I felt something stronger than sorrow. I felt rage. That night, I went into Daniel's old room. The posters still hung on the walls, faded and curling at the edges. The shelves still held dusty toys, relics of a boy who had once run into my arms with laughter in his eyes. I sat on his bed, the mattress creaking under my weight, and let the memories wash over me. I remembered the promises I'd made, the sacrifices I'd endured, the love I'd poured into every day, every decision, every breath. And I realized how one-sided it had all been. A father's duty is to protect, to provide, to love. I had done all of that, but a son's duty is to honor, to respect, to carry forward the bond that was given freely. Daniel had done none of it. And bonds that are broken must be reforged in fire. When I finally stood, my knees cracking, my back aching, I felt lighter, not with peace, but with purpose. The man who walked out of that room wasn't the same father who had crawled on the floor to play with toy trucks. He wasn't the same man who had sold his guitar, his truck, his health, just to keep his son afloat. He was something else now, something sharper, something dangerous. And Daniel had no idea what was coming. The morning after my retirement, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold in my hands. The house was quiet, but my head buzzed with noise, memories of Daniel's voice, the venom in his words, the way he laughed when I told him I wanted to celebrate. "You're useless now." Those words replayed like a hammer against my skull. I had built my life around my son, worked until my bones screamed, given until there was nothing left to give. And in return, I had become nothing more than dead weight to him. But I wasn't dead weight, not yet. And if Daniel couldn't see that, then I'd show him in a way he'd never forget.
It started small, subtle. I pulled out the notebooks I'd kept over the years, ledger books filled with numbers, expenses, debts, small reminders of every dollar sacrificed. I turned the pages slowly, running my finger over the ink, the evidence of my devotion. This was what Daniel never understood. Behind every pair of sneakers, every gadget, every tuition payment, was another night I went hungry, another shift I worked through broken ribs, another winter where I wore 2 coats to keep warm because the heat bill had gone to him. I'd never confronted him with these records before, but now they felt like ammunition. I imagined placing the books in front of him, one by one, making him see, making him choke on the proof of how much he'd taken. But proof wouldn't be enough, not for Daniel. No, words alone couldn't pierce the armor of entitlement he'd built around himself. He needed to feel what I had felt. He needed to be broken. I began watching him. I knew his routines, his patterns. He'd stopped calling, but I still knew enough. He worked at some financial firm in the city, a job he'd bragged about once before hanging up on me. So I drove into the city, parked 2 blocks from his building, sat in my truck with a cap pulled low, watching. I saw him come out at lunchtime,
polished shoes, tailored suit, phone glued to his ear. He laughed with coworkers, slapped one on the back, strutted like he owned the pavement. No one looking at him would ever guess he came from my house, from my sacrifices. I clenched the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I didn't confront him that day, or the next. Patience is something you learn at the plant. Hours of grinding, cutting, welding. You can't rush it, or you'll ruin the piece. The same applied here. If I wanted Daniel to understand, truly understand, I had to wait, had to plan every step, every strike. So I started making lists. Weaknesses, habits, people he trusted, places he frequented. I wrote it all down in neat, careful handwriting, as if I were still keeping the books of his childhood. But this time, the numbers weren't dollars. They were debts. And every debt would be collected.
Weeks passed. I let the anger simmer, low and steady, feeding it just enough to keep it alive. When the neighbors waved at me, I smiled back. When old co-workers invited me for beers, I went, laughed, told stories. No one suspected what was growing inside me. Because rage like this, it doesn't shout, it whispers. One night, I stood in Daniel's old room again. The posters, the toys, the echoes of a boy long gone. I sat on the bed and whispered aloud, "You'll learn, son. You'll learn what it feels like to give everything and get nothing in return." The room seemed to listen, and in that silence I felt the plan beginning to take shape. The opportunity came on a rainy Thursday. I was in the city again, parked across from the bar where Daniel and his coworkers often went after work. Through the rain-streaked windshield, I saw him at a high table, drink in hand, laughing louder than anyone else. He leaned in close to a woman beside him, touched her arm casually like she was already his. His coworkers laughed, egged him on, raised their glasses. That laugh, that same laugh he'd used to dismiss me, echoed through the glass and into my chest like a blade. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. My breath came heavy. That was the moment I knew. This wouldn't just be about making him see. This would be about taking everything he valued, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. That night, back home, I opened a drawer in the garage. Inside lay my old crowbar, its metal darkened with age and use. I lifted it slowly, feeling the weight in my hands, the balance. This wasn't a tool anymore. It was a promise that Daniel would finally understand. And that promise was the only thing that made me feel alive again. I didn't swing the crowbar that night. It would have been too easy, too fast. And fast wasn't the point. No, Daniel had to learn. He had to feel what I'd felt, years of being chipped away, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. So I put the crowbar down carefully, reverently, and instead began with something smaller, something he wouldn't even notice at first. The next day, I drove back to the city and parked near his office. The sidewalks bustled with suits and umbrellas, but I blended in, an old man with a cap, sitting in a beat-up truck. No one gave me a second glance. When Daniel's car pulled up, a sleek black sedan, polished to a mirror shine, I felt my teeth grind. That car represented everything he thought he'd earned, but it was built on me, on my sacrifices. I waited until he was inside the building. Then I slid out of my truck, hunched low against the rain, and walked to his car. With a nail I'd brought from home, I crouched beside the back tire. One slow, deliberate twist, then another. The air hissed out softly like a dying breath. I didn't slash the tire completely, just weakened it, just enough that it would fail when he least expected. As I drove away, my hands shook, not from fear, but from a strange electric thrill. The first move had been made. 2 days later, I was back, parked across from his office again. When Daniel came out at dusk, rain falling hard, I watched him unlock his car and climb inside. He pulled away, headlights cutting through the storm. I followed at a distance. A mile down the road, the back tire blew. The sedan skidded, fish-tailed, sparks flying as metal scraped pavement. He fought the wheel, swerved onto the shoulder, and slammed to a stop. I pulled over a block back, heart pounding. Through the rain and distance, I saw him get out, soaked, cursing, kicking the useless tire. His phone glowed in his hand as he dialed for help. And I sat there, engine idling, watching. He was helpless, just like I had been all those years. And God help me, it felt good. But it wasn't enough. A flat tire wouldn't teach him. It was just a taste, a whisper of what was coming. No, I had to go deeper. The next week, I tracked his schedule more closely. Mornings at the office, lunch at the same deli on 5th, evenings at the bar on Thursdays, the gym on Mondays, his apartment in the high-rise downtown. He was predictable, too predictable, and predictability is a weapon in the hands of someone patient enough to use it. One night, I slipped into the lobby of his building. The guard barely looked at me, just another tired old man visiting a son, maybe a grandfather heading upstairs. I waited until the guard's attention shifted, then slipped into the stairwell. Climbing 12 flights with my knees screaming nearly broke me, but I pushed through. On Daniel's floor, I found his door. I didn't try to go inside, not yet. Instead, I slid an envelope beneath it. Inside was a photograph, not of him, not of me, of the house he grew up in. Taken from the outside, the porch light casting shadows across the sagging boards. A silent reminder. I'm still here. I never left, and neither did your past. I imagined him finding it, frowning, wondering who had taken it, wondering if someone was watching. I walked back down 12 flights, knees shaking, but with a smile on my lips. The next time he called me, his voice was sharp. "Did you send me something?" I feigned confusion. "What do you mean, son?" "Don't play dumb, Dad. Someone left a picture of the old house under my door." I let silence stretch just long enough for unease to creep in. Then I said softly, "Maybe it's a reminder." "A reminder of what?" "Of where you came from." He cursed and hung up. I sat there with the phone still pressed to my ear,
a slow fire burning in my chest. For the first time in years, I had gotten under his skin.
It became a game then, a slow, deliberate game of shadows. I loosened the screws on his apartment door so it rattled in the frame when the wind blew. I swapped the labels on his mailbox so letters arrived late, bills went missing. I left little things where they didn't belong. A keychain from his childhood slipped into his gym locker. A note in his handwriting he couldn't remember writing. Each time I pictured his face tightening, his confidence cracking. Each time I felt stronger. But Daniel didn't collapse. He pushed back. He called me more often now, but not with requests for money, with accusations, with suspicion. "Are you following me, Dad? Why are you messing with me? What the hell is wrong with you?" Each time I played the role of the confused, weary father. Soft voice, trembling sighs. "No, son. Why would I ever do something like that? I love you." The words were true once. Now they were a mask. Behind them, the fire grew hotter. The turning point came one Friday night. Daniel stormed into my house without knocking, fury etched into every line of his face. "You've lost it, old man," he spat. "I know it's you. The pictures, the mailbox, the door. You think you're scaring me? You're pathetic, just like you've always been." I sat at the kitchen table, hands folded, watching him rant. His voice rose, sharp and cruel, his spit flecking the air. "Do you know how embarrassing it is to have a father like you? Do you know what people would say if they knew you were stalking me? You should have died with Mom. At least then I'd be free of you." The words hit like a hammer, but I didn't flinch. Not this time. I just stared at him, calm, silent, letting the rage burn steady inside me. When he finally stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled, I whispered into the empty room, "You have no idea what you've unleashed, son." And for the first time, I meant every word. After Daniel stormed out of my house that night, the silence that remained was deafening. I sat at the table, staring at the grain of the wood, tracing the grooves with my fingertips. His words echoed in my skull like a hammer. "You should have died with Mom." The son I worked myself into the ground to raise, wishing me gone. No, not wishing, declaring, as though my death would be his liberation. It wasn't rage that gripped me then, not at first. It was clarity. He had drawn his line, and now so would I. I stopped holding back. The next morning, I called the company he worked for, disguising my voice just enough. I spun a story of fraud, of unethical practices, of files that could implicate him. Anonymous, whispered. Enough to trigger suspicion, enough to set fire to the carefully stacked tower of his reputation. That evening, I parked across from his office again, watched as two men in suits met him at the entrance, ushering him back inside.
watched his face go pale as they showed him papers, questions flying like daggers. He thought he was untouchable. Now the ground shifted beneath him, and I smiled. But it wasn't just his job I wanted to touch. It was his sense of safety, his control, his belief that he was the predator while I was prey. So one night, I broke into his apartment. The old skills came back easier than I expected. A coat hanger, patience, the creak of a lock. I moved through the place like a ghost, every shadow mine. I didn't take anything, didn't break anything. I just changed things. I switched the positions of his kitchen knives, left his TV on a channel of static, volume low, moved his toothbrush to the other side of the sink. Tiny, meaningless changes until you noticed them, until they ate at you. When he returned that night, I was parked across the street, watching from the shadows. Through his window, I saw him freeze, saw his eyes flick across the room, saw him yank open drawers, slam cupboards, his breathing sharp and fast. He knew someone had been there, and it drove him wild. The next day, he called me again. "You're sick, you know that." His voice trembled. Anger or fear, I couldn't tell. "You came into my home. My home! What the hell do you want from me?" I let silence stretch long enough for him to squirm. Then, in the calmest voice I could manage, I said, "Respect." He barked a laugh, bitter and cruel. "Respect? From me? After everything you've done to ruin my life? You're insane." I didn't answer, just let him hear my breathing before I hung up. It wasn't about words anymore. Words were meaningless. It was about the hunt. The more pressure I applied, the more cracks spread across him. At work, whispers spread. His boss questioned him. His colleagues eyed him with suspicion. At home, paranoia grew. He installed cameras in the hallway, new locks on his doors. He jumped at shadows, flinched at sudden sounds. I was in his blood now, a poison he couldn't flush out. And yet, even cornered, his cruelty didn't fade. One night, I saw him on the street, berating a young waitress outside a diner, his voice sharp, cutting her down to nothing. I felt the rage rise hot in my throat, my fists tightening at my sides. That girl was just like me, another victim of his endless need to dominate, to belittle, to crush. And in that moment I swore I wasn't just going to teach him fear. I was going to strip him bare, piece by piece, until the man who had disrespected me his whole life was nothing but a broken shell. But I made one mistake. I underestimated his ability to fight back. 2 nights later, I returned to his apartment. Same stairwell, same quiet hallway. But this time, when I slipped the lock, I found the chain still latched. And then I heard it, his footsteps, sudden and heavy. The door yanked open as far as the chain allowed, and there he was, Daniel. His face twisted with rage, eyes bloodshot, a bat in his hand. "You sick bastard! I knew it was you! I knew it all along!" The chain snapped as he threw his shoulder into the door, the bat swinging wild. I stumbled back, heart pounding, the rush of adrenaline crashing into me like a wave. But I didn't run. Not yet. I caught the bat mid-swing, the wood jarring against my palms. His strength was real, fueled by fury, but mine was older, colder. We struggled in the doorway, grunting, snarling, father and son locked in a battle that had been building for decades. For a moment, the weight of him pressed me back. My knees screamed, my arms shook. But then something deeper took over, something primal. I twisted the bat free and shoved him hard into the wall, his head cracked against plaster, dust raining down. He stared at me, stunned, disbelief in his eyes. You'd hit me?" he whispered, like the idea was unthinkable. And I leaned close, my voice low and steady. "After everything you've done, boy, you have no idea what I'm capable of." I left him there, dazed, bleeding, watching me walk away. Because it wasn't time yet. Not quite. The game was still unfolding. And soon the final act would come. I walked away from that apartment building with my chest heaving, the weight of the bat still lingering in my hands. My arms ached, my heart thundered. My mind, though, was sharper than it had ever been. There was no turning back now. Daniel had seen me. He knew it was me. The charade was finished. All that remained was the end. I spent the next week preparing, not rushing, not charging headlong into it. No, this had to be precise, controlled. For 40 years I'd given him everything. Food, shelter, education, love. Every scrap of myself went into building him up. Now I would take him apart with the same patience, piece by piece. The first step was isolation. I watched him, followed him at a distance, the way I used to follow him when he was a boy, crossing the street, making sure he was safe. Only this time, I wasn't keeping him safe. This time, I was looking for cracks. And I found them. The fallout at his office spread quicker than I expected. Rumors became inquiries. Inquiries became meetings behind closed doors. He came home later each night, his stride quicker, his eyes darting. The king of the hill was losing his footing, and I was there for every stumble. One night, I made my way into the parking garage beneath his building. He always parked in the same spot, near the stairwell, under a flickering light that buzzed like an angry insect. I crouched low behind the concrete pillar, waiting. When his car pulled in, I felt my pulse spike. The engine cut, the door opened, his shoes clicked against the cement. Then he froze, because his headlights illuminated something he hadn't expected. A photograph, taped to the pillar. It was of him as a boy, sitting on my shoulders at the county fair, a balloon in his hand, both of us smiling like fools. The smile on my face was wide, his was pure.
And now, decades later, that image mocked him. He tore it down, crumpled it in his fist, spun around like a trapped animal. But I was already gone, blending into the shadows of the stairwell.
The next day he came to my house again. This time he didn't knock. He didn't shout. He just barged in, eyes wild, voice cracking. "Why are you doing this?" he demanded. "What do you want from me? Money? Power? What is it?" I looked up from the kitchen table where I sat, calm as a lake in winter. "I already told you," I said. "Respect." He laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "You think you can scare respect out of me? You're nothing, old man, nothing. Without you, you'd still be rotting in that shack, working yourself to death for pennies. I made something of myself. I don't owe you a damn thing." The words cut. They always did. But this time they didn't bleed me dry. This time they sharpened me. I stood, slow and steady, meeting his eyes. "You think you made yourself?" I said quietly. "Every step you took, I paved the road. Every choice you had, I paid for with my blood. You've built your castle on my bones, boy, and now it's time it came crashing down." His jaw tightened, his fists clenched, but he didn't swing this time. He backed away, and in his eyes I saw it for the first time. Fear. That night I returned to his apartment, not to play games, not to rearrange his things or slip notes under his door. This time I came with purpose. The lock gave way under my hand, the chain snapping like brittle bone. Inside, the place reeked of stale whiskey and sweat. Papers were strewn across the counter. Termination notices, financial statements, legal threats. His empire was crumbling faster than I'd planned. And in the center of the living room sat Daniel. He didn't move when I entered, didn't shout, didn't swing. He just sat there, head in his hands, shoulders shaking. For a moment I almost felt pity. Almost. But then he looked up, and the sneer returned. "You happy now?" he spat. "You've ruined me. Are you proud of yourself, Dad? Is this your big revenge?" I stepped closer, the weight of years pressing down on me, but not slowing me. "This isn't about pride," I said. "It's about balance. It's about you learning what it means to lose, to hurt, to feel the weight of the disrespect you've carried like a crown." He stood unsteady, his hands trembling. "You can't do this," he muttered. "You can't just destroy me. I'm your son." The words rang hollow. Being my son should have meant something, should have carried love, loyalty, respect. But he'd burned that bridge long ago. Now, the blood between us was nothing but fuel. I stepped closer, my shadow falling across him, my voice low and final. "You stopped being my son the moment you wished me dead. Now you're just another man who needs to be broken." He lunged then, desperate, fist swinging wild. But I was ready. Age may have stiffened my body, but rage had sharpened my reflexes. I caught his wrist, twisted, drove him down to the floor.
He cried out, his voice echoing off the walls, the same voice that had once called me Dad, with love and laughter. Now it was just noise. I pinned him there, his breath ragged, his eyes wide. I whispered, "This is what you've made me. This is what you've forced me to become." And in that moment, I had a choice. End it now, or drag it out, make him feel the full weight of years of pain. The decision settled heavy in my chest, and I knew this was only the beginning. Daniel writhed beneath me, his breath hot and ragged, his fists pounding weakly against the floor. For years I had seen him as unstoppable, a storm, a force too strong for me to oppose. But here, now, with my knee in his chest and my grip iron locked around his wrist, he was just a man, a weak, desperate man, and I had never felt stronger.
"Get off me!" he snarled, his voice breaking. "You're crazy! You've lost it!" "Maybe," I said, leaning closer, my voice calm, measured. "Or maybe I finally found it. Found the strength you tried to grind out of me all these years." His eyes flared, his teeth bared, but beneath the fury I saw it again, that flicker, that trembling shadow of fear. I let him go, stood and stepped back, giving him space to rise. He scrambled up, shoulders heaving, his hands shaking like a cornered animal. But he didn't attack again. Not yet. "You think this is justice?" he spat. "You think breaking me will fix your pathetic life? You'll still be nothing when I'm gone, an old man in a rotting house with nothing to show for it?" The words were knives, sharp and deliberate, but they didn't sink the way they used to. Because I finally saw him for what he was, not a titan, not a monster. Just a scared boy, still clawing for power, still desperate to stand taller by pushing others down. I let out a long, slow breath. "You really don't get it, do you? It was never about fixing me. It's about making you face what you've done. About teaching you the lesson you refused to learn when you had the chance." I stepped toward him. He backed away, his shoulders hitting the wall. For the first time in his life, he had nowhere to run. The silence between us stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then, with a sudden burst, he lunged past me, bolting for the door. But I was ready. I grabbed the bat I'd taken from him during our last fight. It leaned against the wall, waiting for this moment. With one swing, I cracked it across the doorframe, inches from his face. The wood splintered, the sound like thunder in the room. He froze. His chest heaved, his eyes widened, and I saw it again. That moment, he realized the truth. There was no escape. I lowered the bat, not striking him, just letting the weight of it hang heavy in the air between us. "Sit," I commanded. For a moment he didn't move. His pride fought, screamed, resisted. But then his knees buckled, and he sank into the chair at the table. I pulled another chair across from him and sat down, the bat resting across my lap. "Now you'll listen," I said. I talked. For hours I talked. I told him everything, about the nights I came home from the mill with blood on my hands and still made him dinner,
about the winters I froze because I gave him my coat, about the birthdays I missed because I was working double shifts to keep the lights on. I told him about his mother, about how her last words were a plea, take care of him, no matter what, and how I'd done that for decades, even when it killed me inside. He tried to interrupt, to deflect, to sneer, but I didn't let him. Every time he opened his mouth, I slammed the bat against the floor, the crack echoing, silencing him. By the time I finished, his eyes were glassy, his lips trembling, but not with remorse, with rage. "You think I care?" he hissed. "You chose that life. You chose to be a nobody. You think your sacrifices mean something? They don't. They were your choice, not mine." The words hit me like a slap, not because they were new, because they were final. All those years wasted. Something inside me snapped. The calm I'd held on to shattered. I slammed the bat onto the table so hard it split down the middle, the wood groaning, splinters flying. Daniel flinched, his chair skidding back. I stood, looming over him, my voice a growl that shook the room. "You ungrateful bastard! Every drop of sweat, every broken bone, every tear I shed was for you! And still you spit in my face." He tried to rise, but I grabbed his collar, yanking him forward until our foreheads nearly touched. "You want to talk about choices? Fine. I made mine, and now I'll make another." I let him go, shoving him back into the chair. The weight of my decision pressed down on me, heavy but undeniable. There was no redemption for him, no lesson he would ever learn. The only thing left was to end it. But not tonight. Not yet. I wanted him to know what was coming. I wanted him to feel the weight of dread the way I had felt the weight of his disrespect all my life. So I leaned down, my lips close to his ear, my whisper colder than the grave. "This isn't over, son. Not until you've lost everything. And when you finally beg me to finish it." I pulled back, looking into his wide, terrified eyes. "I will." I left him there, shaking, his face pale, his knuckles white against the arms of the chair. The storm had begun, and soon it would consume him whole. The nights after that confrontation stretched on like endless corridors. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's face, half sneer, half fear as I whispered my promise. It should have satisfied me, the terror I'd planted in him, the cracks I'd carved into his soul. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. The years of pain he dealt me, they couldn't be repaid with fear alone. No, the balance demanded more. I followed him closely after that night. He tried to act normal, to stride through the world as if he still held power, but it was a mask, thin and brittle. I could see the twitch in his jaw, the way his eyes darted to every shadow. He was unraveling. At work, his colleagues whispered behind his back. He snapped at them, desperate to claw back control, but the foundation was already gone. At home, he drank more, bottles piled in the trash, his gait unsteady, his voice slurred when he shouted into the empty rooms. And every night I was there, watching, waiting, like a ghost he couldn't shake. The final straw came on a Tuesday.
He left work early, shoulders hunched, tie loose. I followed him to a bar on the edge of town. He drank until his head lolled, then stumbled out into the alley. And there, under the flickering streetlight, he made his mistake. He called me, not to threaten, not to rage, but to beg. "Dad," he slurred into the phone, his voice thick, broken. "Please, stop. I can't take it anymore." I sat in my truck, the phone pressed to my ear, my chest tight. For a flicker of a second, I almost felt the old ache, the old father's instinct to protect, to forgive. But then I remembered every insult, every dismissal, every time he spat in my face after I gave him everything. And the ache hardened into iron. "No," I said simply, and I hung up. That was the moment I knew. It was time. I planned carefully. The next night I waited outside his building. When he staggered home, drunk and weary, I followed him inside. The elevator was out, so he climbed the stairs, cursing under his breath. On the 12th floor, the light flickered, shadows stretching across the peeling wallpaper. He fumbled with his keys, muttering, and I stepped out of the stairwell. "Evening, son." He froze, slowly turned. His face went pale. "You." I walked toward him, steady, each step echoing off the walls. No more games, no more warnings. Tonight it ends. He backed against his door, keys clattering to the floor. "Dad, please," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Don't do this. I'll change. I swear I'll change." I stopped a few feet away, staring at him. "I gave you decades to change, and all you gave me was pain." He lunged suddenly, shoving past me, bolting for the stairwell. But I was ready. I grabbed his arm, yanking him back. He swung a wild fist, grazing my jaw, but I barely felt it. I slammed him against the wall, the plaster cracking beneath the impact. He gasped, struggling, clawing at my grip. I leaned close, my voice low, final. "You broke me, son. Now it's my turn." And with every ounce of strength left in my body, I hurled him down the hallway. He crashed into a table, glass shattering, wood splintering. He tried to rise, staggering, blood trickling from his brow, but I was already on him. The fight was brutal. He swung wild, desperate, but sloppy. Years of comfort had made him soft. I absorbed the blows, gritting my teeth, each strike fueling the fire inside me. Then I struck back, a fist to his gut, an elbow to his jaw, a knee to his ribs. He gasped, coughed, wheezed, and with every sound I felt the weight of years lifting off my shoulders. He stumbled, fell to his knees, blood on his lips. "Please," he rasped. "Don't." I raised the broken bat, the splintered weapon that had become my symbol. "This is the respect you never gave me," I said, and I brought it down.
The crack echoed through the hallway. He collapsed, face to the floor, unmoving. I stood over him, chest heaving, the bat trembling in my hands. It was done. Finally, after all the years, it was done. I didn't kill him. Not then. Not yet. I left him breathing, broken, battered, but alive, because death would have been mercy, and mercy was something he had never given me. No, his punishment was to live, to wake each day in pain, to feel the fear of knowing I was still out there, watching, waiting, the way I had lived in fear of his disrespect all my life. When I walked out of that building, the night air was cool on my face. For the first time in decades, I felt light, free. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe the police would come. Maybe Daniel would seek revenge of his own. But it didn't matter, because tonight the balance had been restored, and the boy who had once called me Dad now knew exactly what it meant to cross the man who raised him, the father he disrespected, the father who had finally taken his revenge.